Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
Everybody's talking about AI, and so are we. This week, we get deep in AI, talking about what makes it different from other trends. What are the challenges with the hype cycle that we're in right now? What are some new opportunities for people and the risks and how you mitigate them? And a couple of great case studies. I really hope you enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Mark Binkley and Vasilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show.
Awesome. Welcome to the show today, everybody. You are going to join us on a cool conversation about AI. Everybody's talking about AI today. We've got a couple of fantastic guests to help us sort through the hype and the fact and the fiction. Darby Sieben from Unbounce, he's the chief product officer there, has been an investor in a number of different startups, and we'll get talking about that in a second. But Craig Hainey is the other guest who's also joining us. He's the head of ventures at AltaML. Craig's had a long history in startups and also in the tech space. And so we're really excited to have you both on the show to talk about this topic.
Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, really excited to be here.
This is going to be great.
Yeah, this is great. So, Craig, we talked about this at the beginning. The one thing that you guys don't want to talk about is the death of humanity. So let's just get that off the table.
So I have a strong belief that AI will not kill us all. I believe that will be this will be a positive for humanity, not the death of us all.
I agree. I was laughing when we were in the prep saying that because there was this. You've seen the Boston Dynamics robot, and so there's this one video that came out a couple of years ago, I think now, where it was jumping over like this obstacle course and like doing backflips and parkour kind of stuff. And the one comment was, "We're dead." But so I think so maybe we could start there in that, like, there's this idea of like the Terminator kind of world where the machines are going to take over. I think that talks about artificial general intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence and machine learning. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's...
Maybe Craig, you can start there.
Yeah, I think that's fair. In if you look at AI or machine learning, and we'll talk a little bit, I think, about some of the differences of this language. I think the language is really important to get right. But general AI or not general intelligence, but AI itself is really around predicting using past data sets and what the past is and what we have to help us predict what might happen in the future. And there's the sort of recent, over the last sort of 8 to 10 months on generative AI is a really good example of what that can do, but that's not artificial general intelligence. And so that's more looking forward. I don't know if Darby wants to talk a little bit about kind of the AGI piece of that, but I think that artificial intelligence, as we would define it, is kind of taking the existing data sets that we have and kind of using algorithms to predict what might happen today or in the future.
Yeah, and I think, maybe Greg, just on top of that, I think today the AI, and I really like the way IBM talks about it. Most AI today is fairly narrow. Now, narrow doesn't mean it's not powerful, right? Because I think what we're seeing with large language models, it's incredibly powerful. But, as Greg said, it's a lot about, training on data sets and predictive, modeling going forward. Where I think AGI, and I'm no expert in this area, and if we ever are going to get there or not, that is really how do you then take the intelligence level of a machine and have it as the same level of a human with respect to reasoning, self-conscious, and solving problems not based off of a data set. And I think we're still far from that. But I do like this notion that today AI is a narrow AI, but that doesn't mean narrow does not equal not powerful. It's incredibly powerful. But I think we're a far way away from having human reasoning and having machines being able to actually do the kind of deductive reasonings that humans do.
But there is things like reinforcement learning. There are areas out there that are, and in many ways, pioneered by Canadians that do get us, I don't want to say closer to general and artificial general intelligence, but it does make that AI piece incredibly powerful, and it can get pretty close, or at least smart to this idea of really reasoning some of these decisions, or reinforcing itself as it is, based on a bunch of different scenarios that it can run through faster than anything has been able to do in the past. And that's the power, is it can run through millions of scenarios in the time that we can talk through a sentence. Yeah. And that really is powerful.
Absolutely.
So V, you had that one stat that you were just talking about before when we were like, maybe you can just share that.
So it was interesting because as we were doing prep for this episode, I came across that for Spotify, it took 150 days to get to 1 million users. For Instagram, it took them 75 days to get 1 million users. And it took ChatGPT 5 days to get to 1 million users. And I think that kind of really puts it on a different pedestal or on a different level, because you start realizing like the hype around this product or the idea of generative AI. I don't know what, maybe it's because like as people, it's easy for us to understand because it's just a language model, right? So I think the adoption is a lot different than anything else that we've had to date, which is probably why there's a lot of hype around it. Darby, what's your take on this hype train, if you will, right now?
Yeah. So, as I think about, obviously ChatGPT came out, and I think that was a massive game changer.
Yeah.
And for me, the game changing on that one was, and I always use this test. I'll kind of reference a book that I read years ago, Peter Lynch's One Up on Wall Street, which is, people within the industry, they all get excited about stuff, but you got to look outside the industry. And he used this example of Legs underwear.
Great example.
And his wife said, you know what, this is just flying off the shelf. And he just stood at a grocery store and watched it. For me, where it really clicked with AI or like ChatGPT, and don't get me wrong, AI has been around for a bit. Siri, Alexa, all of this stuff is there, but it's kind of hidden. I think what ChatGPT is, it brought the use case right out to the forefront. And I always use a test of my sisters. I have 2 older sisters, and they are not technos at all. One works in a restaurant, and one works over here. Like, they're not. The minute they saw when I demoed what this thing could do, instantly both said, I want to have an account. I can see an application for this. And I think that was the big moment where we saw this explosion, because the concept of how to use AI in terms of the use case became real for everybody else. In the tech world, we've seen it for a while, but I think it became real for everybody else. And I think that's why we've seen a growth that, it's fastest growing product ever in the history. And I think it's that capturing the imagination of the average person who's not in this industry. And I think that's what ChatGPT did.
I think it's a great example of, if we talk about this in maybe more marketing terms or in general, technology terms, it's also an example of great UX. Like, why did this? It was really easy to understand where the front door was. Like, AI has been this thing in the back door, or in the kind of in the closet that people have been talking about for 20 years, 30 years. When did the movie AI come out about the child? I don't know, call it the 90s or something like that.
Or like Gary Kasparov back in the day with Deep Blue and then the Go project. And like but you're right.
But it never had a front door. Now, and the UX is so simple. No one had to get trained on how to use it. The sign up was very frictionless. And I think this is a good example of why UX matters. It doesn't have to be flashy, but it provides very little training or learning of how to use it. And I think that's the power of the adoption side of it, is the user experience. It was super powerful. Like, the technology was there, right? OpenAI has done a lot of work, but it was how easy it was for someone like Darby's sisters, who are not technophiles, to simply understand how to use it and what the potential was. And that's just really rare in technology. And, that's why I think people are mimicking this to smartphones and internet, because as soon as people start to connect the dots on the power of this, it opens up their imagination. And that's powerful in of itself.
I wanted to ask let's start with Darby, but Craig, feel free to jump in too. Like, there is this, V and I've talked about this a bunch of times, but there's trends that people get excited about. We've been a part of a few of them in the marketing world. Metaverse, voice search was one. I was trying to give this example the other day. I should have thought about it, but PokemonGo. Like, I was literally trying to figure out how to put our stores in a PokemonGo for a while. Like, for an advertising platform. But so these things that come and go, The Segway would be another one. Like, there's this hype around these products. What makes it? Let's start with Darby. What do you think is different about either ChatGPT or just AI in general from these other trends and whatnot that have existed in the past?
Yeah, I think it's important to separate trends from big fundamental shifts. And I think right now we still are in this moment of imagination, but I do think AI is not a trend. This is going to permeate every single industry, every single use case in some way, shape, or form. I think some of the things you've talked about, I'm actually still very bullish on voice search. I think voice search with AI and where we're going, I think, voice is actually going to have, I think, a very big resurgence because voice is going to allow us to say something where, can take 10 or 15 steps that would normally take. AI can now do those 10 or 15 steps, and voice is going to be the entry door. I think some of the other ones you've talked about, like Segway is an interesting example. I think that's an amazing product, but, distribution problems, regulation problems, government problems, like there's just a whole bunch of things that were related to that. For me, AI is no different than the foundations of the internet as a communications platform. And, back in the 90s in my first company, I made the mistake of having to actually at that time, we were building cool stuff, but I still had to explain to people what the internet was. I think, now you don't have to do that anymore, but I think that time compression with AI has just gotten smaller. So I don't think AI is a trend. I think this is now going to be fully embedded with everything that we do going forward. Unlike some of those other things, which are trends. PokemonGo was a great product. It was an exciting thing, but I think those are trends that are going to come and go. And I think the last phase of AI is when we stop talking about AI and it just becomes part of our everyday life. That's when it's just there and it's not it's not a hype. It's not a trend. This is the real deal. This is a big tectonic shift. I think it's no different than the internet. Maybe no different than mobile. Maybe no different than cloud computing. Right. I think AI is the last.
Yeah, and I'll agree a little bit. I 100% agree on the voice on the voice search, voice to text, whatever it is, because I've got 3 kids between the ages of 13 and 11. And their first inclination is to talk to their computer, talk to the speakers on the wall. They do not type their questions, and that's their first. I hate it because I want them to learn how to type, and they're like, "Yeah, but I don't need to.
Don't need to, Dad."
Shit, I know. Yeah. So, anyways, I'm learning.
It's funny you mentioned that. 'Cause I'm flashing back to somebody once saying, "Oh, my kids were going up to the TV." I think it was Mitch Joel. Swiping the TV screen. They're like, "Dad, it's broken."
Right. So they're learning this, right? But I think voice is one of those things. And as Darby said, combining that with the ability to take those terabytes and gigaterabytes of data and parameters, billions of parameters that they're using to train these models, and to be able to give that better contextual search and better contextual answers is just going to get more powerful. I mean, as Einstein once said, you can't solve tomorrow's problems with today's paradigm. Yeah. We got to think about tomorrow's paradigm, and AI is tomorrow's paradigm. The other thing I think about this is this doesn't work without the raw materials and compute power that NVIDIA, Microsoft, AWS has brought forward. So this was a tool that had been conceived for 20 years, but no one could do it fast enough because the compute power there, the transistors weren't there. I'm not a hardware guy. I don't know all the things, but NVIDIA changed the game with their compute power and then the distributed cloud computing and allowing them to use multiple computers to do the same processing versus having to put it on one computer. All of that changed the game, and that allowed you to use billions of parameters and all of the text files and image files to be able to train what a cat is and how to talk back like a human or a reasonable amount. So I do think it is a new paradigm, and we have to think about it differently because a lot of things had to come together to make this happen. And we just happen. We are very lucky. We just happen to be in this world where this stuff kind of came together. Yeah. And we are at that time, I think, where this convergence of technology, internet capacity, compute power, all of and data, the ability to sort of consume this data at vast quantities is just sort of all pulling this together to be super interesting. I think it's a tool. I don't think it's a product. I think it is a tool. Yeah. And like any tools, there's bunch of variations that are going to be built on top of this. I don't think it's a platform. I think it's a tool. And I think that's a little bit different. People talk about an AI platform, and I don't really believe it is. I think you're going to use this tool on multiple platforms. You're going to build a lot of things with this tool, but I don't believe it's a platform because it's too broad. It's too powerful to think of one platform. I just think it's going to be used ubiquitous, as Darby said. When you start talking about this is when it happens. AI is in TikTok and Facebook and Instagram. No one thinks about the AI as you get your feed. You just realize you've been scrolling for 15 minutes and you haven't thought about it. And that's AI sort of pulling us through into understanding what we like and what we don't like. Like, I remember back in the Canadian Tire days, Mark, going to Facebook back in 2012 or 13. And the idea of how do you make your thumb stop in 7 seconds without sound? Like, that was the question that we had to answer back in 2013, is what's the content strategy about that? That seems old now, but that's how we thought about AI now. Now we don't have to worry about that because the computers just do it for us, right? We don't have to think about it. But before, you had to build a content strategy around that. Now everyone else builds the content. You don't even have to build content, and people are monetizing it. So I think it's a tool. I think it's bigger than a platform because it's that distribution of ability to create value out of this is so broad that it's much bigger than a platform.
And maybe just to add to that, I really love what you just said there, Greg, about it's not a product. This is just is a tool. One of the mental models, Mark and V, that I use when I think about big shifts like this is, what are the use cases that can't be applied to this trend? And kind of like the internet was with AI, reverse engineering and going, okay, what sector in the world isn't going to use AI, or what sector in the world isn't going to use large language models, or isn't going to have it somehow infused in their experience? And I think the other trends you talked about earlier, you can say, it's going to be this good use case, or this use case, or this use case.
Right.
As I think through the application of how to leverage AI inside of these use cases, I haven't really come across one yet that jumps out that says it's not going to work there. Which then tells me, this is likely, going to be completely infused into everything that we do. And then eventually it'll just fade into the background and it'll just become normal.
You both touched on something very important there as you were kind of outlining, the power of the tool that we're leveraging. But I think maybe you can speak to this as well, but I've even noticed my own behavior start shift. And I have no problem admitting this, but I am now using Microsoft Edge as my primary browser, just because of the integration that it has with their chatbot, if you will.
You still have a Hotmail account?
I actually do have a Hotmail account. I have a Hotmail account and a live.com account.
And an ICQ number?
Yeah, 414-6795. Hit me up.
Nice.
I'm not kidding. That was genuinely my ICQ number.
Sorry, that was a bit of a rabbit hole.
No. But the reason
I'm just impressed, V, that you didn't even blink when he asked the question.
No, that was instant.
That's impressive.
No, and I'll tell you why I decided to give this a go. It's just because the way that they're looking to integrate their generative AI tool has now have me shifted my behavior on how I use search. I don't use search through the traditional format of going through Google, putting in a bunch of queries. I'm just putting it into the generative AI, the conversational AI tool, say, hey, I'm looking for this. Where can I find it? And it starts spitting out, some suggestions from links and whatnot. And what's that doing for me, though? It's reducing that barrier to the information I'm looking for, because now I don't have to sift through a whole bunch of ads, SEM ads, etc. I can just get right to the source that I'm looking for. And you touched on something around voice. Maybe this is what voice needed to get to actually have that next level. Like, you know what? We don't need it. I have my 16-month-old saying, hey, Google already. And it's incredible to see how she's already forming how to communicate with different things in and around the house. So, I don't know if you've noticed any shifts in your behaviors. And maybe, Greg, you want to kick us off if you have something there on that side. But I've noticed a big change in myself.
I'll admit I haven't yet, and I think because I'm still in the consuming mode, and we're seeing some changes about about how people are adopting and that sort of thing. But I haven't. I'm not that earliest innovator person. I am not the first person to try a lot of technology because I really want to understand the context of which I'd use it. So I want to see a bunch of examples.
Okay.
I'm not late, of course, because this is my world, but I'm also not the first guy.
Okay.
I'm rarely the first guy to use technology. So I haven't made that paradigm shift yet. Still, I'm experimenting for sure, but I have not made the shift to Microsoft Edge. I don't use ChatGPT every day to kind of drive a lot of the things that I'm doing. I certainly use it, but that's not, and maybe that's because most of the people we talk to are on the enterprise side who are still kind of thinking about this and consuming that. Sometimes we believe our own story about how transformative some of this will be because we ride our own hype cycle. Whereas when we talk about the rest of the world and some things, we're like, oh yeah, but they're really nervous. Like we talked to a couple of some of our clients and companies we're dealing with, which are big insurance companies, healthcare companies, that sort of thing. And like, we're banning ChatGPT in our place. Like we're not doing anything in this because we got to do a full environmental scan and a risk analysis and things like that. So
good point.
I'm not changing my behavior yet.
Yeah.
I anticipate that my paradigm shift will change, but I don't exactly know how yet.
Fair enough.
I'm curious to see how it is. I'm learning every day, but I'm not changing as much as maybe the way you're doing, V.
Yeah.
Darby, how about you? Have you changed much about your own behaviors?
Yeah, kind of like V. I mean, actually, one of the interesting behavioral changes is using Edge and Bing probably more than I've ever had in the past. But it's definitely something, that I play with a lot, use it a lot, obviously, within the business that I'm in today. We're much more, less maybe enterprise like Craig's business. So, a lot of our clients are asking for it right away. But for me, I think of, kind of going back to the voice discussion being, you said, voice and AI, I think pairing together. I really do think that is like such a symbiotic relationship. Yeah. And I've often said this as somebody who's, my entire career and everything I owe basically to technology and computers and what have you. I still think one of the worst interfaces that we've ever created, and it was an important interface that we had to create, was actually the keyboard and the mouse. They were important tools to get where we needed to go. But what I like about voice, eyes, hearing, smell,
it's natural.
These are human traits, right? And I think anything that can enable a human trait and do that in a way that really, accelerates that to the next level is just absolutely going to win. And so I think, we're now kind of entering this age of what I almost call really getting back to human-centric design as opposed to designing stuff for keyboards and mice, which are, at some point, if they go away, then we really democratize access to information. We really democratize access to, all of the toolkits that are out there. We have to eliminate those friction points. And I think those are two big friction points. And I think this is where AI can enable a much, much more human-centric approach to technology going forward than maybe in the past where we've had to rely on unnatural human behavior. Yeah.
Hey, I wanted to ask you guys, just before we get off this importance of language thing, there's the machine learning component of the whole artificial intelligence area. That I just wanted to ask you guys about, because I feel like it is different and distinct from AI, but it's for years and years and years we've all heard stuff like big data is really important, or data driven decision making, and all these companies are sitting on mountains and mountains of data that they may or may not be able to access. And maybe that's part of Craig, your comment from your last comment around companies trying to figure out what they need to do, what's available, what they should be uploading and sharing, and the implications of that. So if you guys don't mind just kind of chatting about, Darby, let's start with you, like the machine learning component of the AI world, what is it? And then maybe Craig, if we can come to you on like, what are some of the implications of using this data for machine learning and how companies can start thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, machine learning is really just a subset, one of the subsets of AI. I think it's a great way to look for patterns within data. Great ML examples, obviously Google search and Twitter sentiment and stock predictions and stuff like that are just great examples of, just raw hammering through large subsets of data. And I'm probably butchering the technical terms around all of this, but just machine learning and pulling all of this together. And I think AI sits on top of that, which is now, okay, I've got all of this base data. And now I'm starting to apply, Jack and Jill went up what should the next word be based on all of the data that I've seen, that predictive modeling kind of going forward. So, ML is just, a subset of AI. You can't have AI without ML.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lots of other subsets. So you've got computer vision, you've got NLP, you've got reinforcement learning. Like there's so many parts of this. So AI becomes that all-encompassing generic term of as Darby said, what are the composition or what are the tool sets underneath that kind of compose artificial intelligence? It is machine learning, reinforcement learning, and natural language processing and all of those types of things. So I think that's one of the real challenges in this hype cycle here is the idea of ChatGPT being the only example of AI that people can pull out right now. And that's really dangerous because if I look at our enterprise customers that we work with, we're an applied AI company. So when we think about that, it's taking company data, typically their own data sets, and they are, as Marc said, sort of sitting on buckets of and boatloads of data, but they don't have the context of how to kind of use that in many ways that are relevant. So they think that AI has to be public data sets like ChatGPT. Right. And you're like, no, you can actually use generative AI on your data. So, so we looked at a call center and say, hey, you have 80,000 knowledge base articles inside your call center, and you're expecting your call center employees to figure out how to find that using a very simple decision tree to find out what are the right articles. Well, generative AI could do that way better, and there's no risk to the organization because you're using your data. Yeah. We put the guardrails within that, and there's test cases and back testing that you can do to ensure that what you're getting out of there is true, but you're not risking about putting it out into the world and saying we're training other people on our knowledge base articles. No, you're not. You're using your data sets to apply NLP and computer vision and machine learning into that. So, we talk a lot about sort of the fear and lack of trust and things like that within the AI space. I think the problem is that people just are now using ChatGPT as the only AI. That is what AI is today. And I'm hopefully one of these things we get out of this today is a bit of education that there are other ways to do it. How we train, what we train these models on. You can use ChatGPT on specific data sets. They're on your own enterprise data sets. Therefore, it's not out into the world. You can use a lot of other large language models that are available that can really sort of de-risk a lot of these things. So that's a risk of the hype cycle, or a distraction from the hype cycle on this for some of our larger clients is that's the only conception of AI for that. So continue to want to kind of share that out, that there are really great use cases here which are not risky, which can create tons of enterprise value for small and medium and large companies and governments and things like that are not risky because you can put the guardrails on the data and the output in many ways. You can test those outputs within your own ecosystem.
Without having to actually expose your own data.
Correct.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Greg, about the enterprise. I think this is just going to be such a huge win for enterprise organizations. One of the recent use cases I was reading about, and I think this is just so brilliant, as somebody who grew up in Saskatchewan, dad owned a farm, farming's a pretty big, obviously pretty critical to society and life and food production. But, the ability now for tractors to be able to say, okay, I don't need to blanket pesticide across the entire field, to kill the weeds. I can go over and I can use AI to go, that's a weed. Let's burn that one. Boom, use a laser, zap, weed's gone. This one's gone. And so when you think about that application and how critical it is to us, and, ChatGPT, it can write me a poem and it can do all this other stuff. When I think about those other applications, if we can use less pesticide by getting really, really smart on how we tackle weeds in a field and do that at a level of scale, that I know we're going to actually come through. I mean, this is game changing stuff. And I think, and that is a very unique data set. understanding a field and a weed. But how critically important is that? It's really important to our food supply and our food production and everything else that's going to happen. So I agree. We've got to get out of this bubble of, ChatGPT is a really cool consumer product. It's got application, but, the use cases in the enterprise world are amazing.
It's an interesting example because there's talking about linking this back to the machine learning component. Like you would train a database to recognize a weed versus whatever the crop is.
That's right.
And then with that trained database, then you apply the AI to predict which things to zap, which things not to zap. It's fascinating.
I like that, Greg. Sorry, go ahead.
I just think, we're using this in healthcare too, right? Using diagnostic imaging to understand exactly what certain images are or components within an image that are really hard to decipher from a human. But what you can do is, this is where AI is not going to replace doctors and oncologists. What it's going to do is allow them to use their time way more efficiently, because you can take a look at a radiology report and AI can say, here are the 3 areas where you need to focus because we're unsure of exactly what this is. You've got 30 years of experience. Bring that horsepower into this, and we've narrowed your field of vision because you don't have to focus on the distractions. Here are the 3 things that we really need clarity on. And it's the same technology in many ways, the same technology that Darby's talking about in sort of that weed identification. You're talking about tumor identification or mole identification or anything like that. And you're not eliminating doctors. You're just making them way more powerful and focused on the most important things that they can bring to the table, including bedside manner and time with patients, that they're not just rushing between appointment to appointment because they can focus their time.
Those soft skills that AI can't do, that are really, really important as humans.
Yeah, Craig, you touched, actually, both of you touched on something that's important here, is kind of seeing and outlining some of the risks involved when you're looking at AI-based recommendations. Now, Craig, in your example, where you're thinking about enterprise, and enterprise is kind of leaning on their own data, maybe it's not as risky. But I'd like to position this question to you both, and maybe Darby, we can kick off with you. Do you believe that there are risks if we as consumers or leaders in our organizations just blindly look at AI-based recommendations as being okay? Do you think we should still have that critical mindset that let's push back, let's start thinking about a lot of the recommendations and analyzing them?
Yeah, I absolutely think there's a downside to this. I don't think the downside is AI is going to eliminate humans. That's not it. But I do think that, there's a great video, if your readers have a chance, with Tristan Harris and Azra Raskin from Center for Humane Technology, just talking about the secondary, tertiary effects. And they use the example of social media. And when social media came out, we all said, hey, this is great. It's going to get me closer to family. It's going to do all the things that we all talked the positives were. Yeah. And they were right. They all came to fruition. What we didn't talk about with, social media was echo chambers. What we didn't talk about is how this could be used to manipulate elections. We didn't talk about the negative side of it. And so when we start to think about the consumer application of AI, and I do think going forward, there's going to be 3 really critical things, for businesses. One, I think brand trust in the age of AI is going to be critical. Do I trust the company that I'm working with? I think, understanding my own data set, how do I use it and apply it? And then I think user experiences are 3. But if I think about AI, and I think we're going to see this next upcoming election, AI today can be used. I mean, I only need 3 seconds of somebody's voice and I can start to manipulate and do deep fakes and what have you. Yeah. And so there is some downside. And I don't think it's elimination of humans. I don't think that AI plus a human is going to eliminate a human-only job. So I think those 2 are going to pair. But I think we do have to be careful as a society, rightfully so, because we let social media get so far out of control, it's hard to pull that one back. Right. How do we handle the scams? If I'm a scam artist, I can spin up, stuff today faster than I ever could. If I'm somebody who wants to destabilize a population, I can do that. If I want to manipulate elections, I can do these things at a lot faster. Right. And I think that's the negative downside is the humans who operate badly are going to see this as a very powerful tool, just like the humans that want to operate well see this as a very powerful tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, all agreed with Darby on that, and I think that's why. And I'll speak a little bit from a Canadian standpoint here. Is I think we have call it an opportunity, but also an obligation to be leaders in responsible AI. So there is a movement around responsible AI, and this is not to have all of the answers as sort of those secondary and tertiary impacts of social media as an example, but it is to learn from the last 20 years of social media and to say, what could we apply today within this world of AI that would help us mitigate some of these risks? People will still do bad things, but if we can, mitigate that risk through responsible AI, and being very intentional about how we learn from past mistakes or examples, I think both good and bad. I think that's really important. So, as an example, there was a fairly small group of people that met with Chrystia Freeland recently, talking about artificial intelligence with the Canadian government, and AltaML was, and Nicole Jansen, our CEO, co-CEO, was there. I say that because they're talking about responsible AI as Canada's great position. I mean, we have a certain position in the world of which we believe, rightfully or wrongfully, that that we have some obligation around this sort of centrist and peacekeeping kind of missions. We've at least got a history of that. We should own this, or we could own this. And how do we do this as a nation and put some real horsepower? We have great researchers, we have great technologists, we have great people in this country that are thinking about this. Right. How do we put some fuel on that fire to mitigate some of those risks globally, and then how do we benefit from that as a country, and then as an industry to do that? So I think that's really important to think about. Particularly here in Canada.
It's such an interesting point. I mean, V, when you first asked the question, where my head went was just about anybody I've ever talked to who's managed and owned paid search campaigns. Like, I know that we were on a different end, but these aren't bad actors. They're just maybe bad advice. But everybody will say, and V, you've done lots of this, they'll always say, like, don't believe everything they're recommending to you, because it's like self-serving for a lot of their intentions and purposes. And so you take that idea further, and then you get into this sort of bad actors and the need for policing. But I think there's such an interesting component there where there's a potential of outsourcing business strategy to machine learning without really even knowing that you're doing it.
Well, I guess that would be lazy, and those people, the business world and will be taken care of shortly. So there might be some wins, but I think I think economics and the market will take care of those people who take the business strategy and sort of put that back out. Because when you look at, if we go back to generative AI, if you go back to what it really produces, it takes all of the history of text language and then produces you the best average. Assuming that you can ask it the right questions, it only produces the best average. Yeah. It doesn't produce anything truly
creative,
unique or creative, unless you start to combine. And we talked a little bit about sort of combining sort of different sets and images and things like that we're getting interesting, I think, but it is the best average. And so these new revolutionary or great business strategies are not the best average, because best average gets you, it just raises the boat just raises the tide a little bit, right?
Benchmark,
but that's what it does. And so for laziness, for some situations, that might be the right point, but it's certainly not from a growth strategy. Is that what you want to? Is that what you want to employ? That's not that. The market will take care of that, because the creative people and the great business thinkers will rise above that and take advantage of that, and the market will reward them.
Thanks, Craig. That's a good point. So maybe this is a really good point. Normally at the beginning, we usually talk about, hey, this is the company you're from, and we kind of introduce your companies. But I think this might be a good jumping off point, because I'm fascinated in both the companies that you guys are in. And Darby, maybe we'll just start with you. Like, what is Unbounce? What is it doing? How is it using AI? How is it something you said earlier, V, made me think about the impact of SEO and like the idea of a website maybe changing, because you're getting recommendations now. And so curious to hear about that. And then similarly for Craig, we talked a little about AltaML, but the business applications and what kinds of things you're helping companies understand and the business opportunities for organizations as well. So maybe Darby, if you don't mind starting.
Yeah, happy to. So Unbounce, we play in a narrow space. We are in the MarTech space. We're a company that was launched about 13 years ago, focused on, how do we get a better return on investment for advertisers? And we believed at that time landing pages was the way to do it. If you have something dedicated, you can get people through that flow a lot quicker. Mm-hmm. And I think that's been proven out. The landing page space has grown quite substantially over the last 13 mm-hmm. years, and away we go. The big shift for Unbounce, as we were looking at the space and going, geez, there's a lot of competition in just, building landing pages. We produced a conversion benchmark report for many, many years. And this was your typical, analyze all the data, create it from a human perspective and bring it back and then say, hey, on average, you're going to see a higher lift. So our first AI product was a product called Smart Traffic, which really is kind of like a routing tool. So A/B testing is this notion of, which is the best performing variant, and Smart Traffic will actually determine and say, here's the best performing variant for this segment as opposed to this segment. So you might have 20 best performing variants as opposed to one. Our next model that we're building out is called Smart Builder. So we're transforming the company from what I would call a static landing page company to really using AI recommendations. And the underlying data set that we have that we're fusing on top of these large language models, we've seen 22.5 billion visitors pass through our clients' landing pages, 3 billion plus, conversions based off of, what our clients have seen. So we've got a pretty good sense of, what a headline, will produce for a certain vertical placement, mm-hmm. image and what have you. So we're thinking about the notion now of creating a landing page, optimizing traffic, really from the perspective of, the global data that we have to say, this is the best combination of how to put things together. Then we're thinking about it from the perspective of how much human control to how much control will a human allow the machine to go. So in an ultimate mm-hmm. end state, you could say, hey, as a user coming in, I'm coming in from this sort of traffic. The machine could change the headline, change the image, because maybe a dog sitting on a boat looking to the right, as opposed to a dog sitting on a boat looking to a left, actually gives you higher conversion. And that's letting the machine do it all. Then there's the other spectrum where some of our clients will want to have a lot more control. But that's what we're really focused on is a narrow use case. I think it's an exciting use case, but it's a narrow use case within the MarTech space on how do we get a better return on investment for clients that are trying to grow their business through advertising. Mm-hmm.
Cool. So from AltaML's standpoint, so really two parts of our business. First off, we're an enterprise applied AI company. So we have about 130 people in our organization. We work with very large organizations across the country to really put models into production. And so these are, what we'll normally do is take existing models from Microsoft or AWS or someone else, but we'll tweak them and manage them and then put them into production within the client environment. That's often using client data. So there's lots of examples of that being, supply chain management, safety, sort of predictions and use cases. There's credit risk modeling. There's lots of sort of examples. There's, we're doing some work with the government of Alberta on wildfire prediction modeling. So taking a look at weather patterns, computer vision on satellite data about where trees have been eaten by the pine beetles, and that creates a higher risk. And then so what we do is we use that predictive modeling to say you should really put more people close there because it's dry, it's windy, and you can see where trees are dying, and so there's a higher risk of that. So we're not saying, hey, there's a fire over here. It's like you should actually put your prevention folks close to that because that's where there's most likely going to start. Mm-hmm. And so that's the sort of, I would say, the primary side of our business, and it's been growing a number of times. We're part of the Vector sort of top 20 AI companies in Canada. We were part of the Deloitte Fast 50. It was kind of 13 in the country, and Deloitte Fast 500 is sort of 37. So we're growing like it's super fun, and we've got lots of happy clients that we like. Now, what I think is really exciting is on the venture side. So this is what I do. This is my part that I run is. is that we create companies that are focused on AI. So what we do here is typically from a venture studio standpoint, we'll often work with someone that has a domain expertise or some example or experience that says, I want to build this company, but I don't have the technology and I need AI to do this. So we'll then come in as a co-founder on the venture studio. We'll provide the AI and ML expertise on that, and we'll help that founder build out a company. We'll invest resources and time and money and capital into that to hopefully grow a bunch of these businesses that are really focused on AI and are usually B2B focused and on really fast scaling markets. So that's the part of the business that I run is leveraging these resources and this ML computer vision technology capabilities to grow new companies and new startups in the space. And that's the part that I get really excited about, because some of the use cases, Darby talked about his sort of MarTech narrow use case. There are so many really interesting use cases where applied AI can revolutionize the way things are being done. And in many cases in kind of, we'll call them ugly, non-sexy type of businesses. You think about sort of modeling, traffic congestion or power line distribution, or you talk about ESG reporting. There's so many different ways we could do some of these things and create new companies out of it that are exciting that I get super jazzed about.
It's very cool.
It's incredible.
It's interesting for all the times you hear about people saying things like, "Oh, well, I'm going to lose my job because AI." I'm like, you guys are both giving examples of brand new businesses that never exist, or brand new like roles that never existed before. I'm like, there's for all that doom and gloom component, there's also the upside, kind of like when we were talking about the risk reward before. I mean, there's so many new opportunities that exist that I think, like V, with you trying out stuff and being involved, I think that's one of the things for takeaways for me anyway, is just get into it. Don't worry about whether it's going to take your job away. Just learn it, understand it, play around with it, and something may actually come out of it as far as like new opportunities, new roles, new positions.
Yeah, like any sort of new tool, if you don't understand it and ignore it, it might sideswipe you. Yeah. But if you learn about it and then you apply your own unique context and experience on that, you can create or be part of something that's super exciting because you have a unique background, you have a unique perspective, and you've got to understand the tool, right? You can't it's really difficult to go around the world and not use a mobile phone or not use the internet today. Yeah. So if you ignored this 20 or 30 years ago, you would be in real trouble. But did it take jobs away? It changed some jobs but created many more. Yeah. This, I suspect, will be the same thing, that some jobs absolutely will be gone, but that would be the significant minority. This will augment most jobs, and it will create many more jobs in the future, because people will get creative and build these new, both inside organizations, like from the entrepreneurship standpoint, as well as new companies on the entrepreneurship standpoint.
It reminds me of that movie Hidden Figures, where they were like humans were the computers trying to calculate how you're going to get the rocket to the moon. And then there was that group of ladies that were also computers, but there was an opportunity for them to program the IBM machine that was brand new for the project. And so they learned Fortran, and then all of a sudden there they are running the whole show pretty much because they've got this knowledge on how to use it. So rather than worrying about the risk of losing their jobs in the existing world, they just went, okay, well, let's dig into this and figure out what we can do with it.
What's funny, as you guys were talking about, losing your jobs, like I'll openly admit this, I'm in between work right now. But it's funny, I will copy and paste a job description into ChatGPT. I'm like, hey, can you pump out some interview questions I could be prompted with, for example? So it's a tool that I'm using right now to land my next gig. So it's kind of like, joke's on you. You're not taking my job.
Let me give you a really cool example from one of our founders, or one of our companies that we're working. It's called Sylvester. It's an AI tool to show you if your cat is in pain or not. And
actually, she's I forget her name.
Susan.
She's in Calgary, right?
She's out of Calgary.
Yeah.
Super interesting. And so there's been a bunch of money put through private equity into vets. And part of that, what's happened over the last sort of consolidation, is that there's more money to build technology platforms. And so now they're doing remote visits for pets and things like that. But they've never had a tool to actually say, is your cat unhealthy, or is your cat in pain? Because cats are very bad at showing their emotions and showing the pain unless they want to kill you. And so, because if there is going to be a threat to humanity, it is felines. It's not AI. Yeah,
I agree with that, actually.
I'm with you. I'm a dog person.
But what we're doing in this is that tool is actually enabling more cats to get the help that they need, which will drive more vet visits, because cats are a very small percentage of vet visits because they don't show their symptoms. They hide them until they're super sick, and then it becomes an unfortunate event instead of a sort of a preventative or a healthcare thing. So this is one of those really important AI tools that is driving outcomes which are really important to a very large part of the population, but will actually create, I think, more jobs, more vet interactions, and more healthy cats, because they're using relatively simple technology to measure the kind of the pain threshold of or the pain call threshold of cats today.
Incredible.
Yeah.
If you guys got 5 more minutes.
Yep.
Okay, I just have one question I was thinking about. So V and I are also in this class or doing our MBAs, but there's a few courses that we were taking about entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. So we've talked a little bit, like Sylvester is a great example of an entrepreneurial activity. But I'm also curious about your take, maybe Darby, to start with you. Like within your organization, how do you, there's this new platform, this new, what are we calling it? Tool, AI. And you guys are at the forefront in a lot of ways of pushing that. But within your company, I was wondering, how do you facilitate the psychological safety and the ideas within the organization to help improve the product? I'm curious, like, is there a lesson that we can learn from how you guys are taking, or in your past, how you've gone from just a landing page company to an AI-based organization, where you can facilitate ideas from within an organization, so you have that intrapreneurship idea that's fostered inside the company?
Yeah, I mean, in kind of my simplest mental model, I think it always comes down to, and within our organization, with any organization that I've looked at, and it doesn't matter what your function is, I think intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship are same sides of the coin. I've been both. I've run companies, and then I was, at RBC Ventures building inside, and I think it's just, what problem do you want to solve? Because there's advantages to both, but they effectively are the same thing. But if I really simplify everything down, I think it just comes down to, what is the experience? Going back to kind of the top of the hour when Greg mentioned, the user experience, whether it's our customer support team who's thinking about, okay, how do I provide better service to my clients and how do I then use this tool? They're driving innovation, thinking about the notion of, so servicing clients in that way, just like our engineering team is thinking about, okay, how do we apply these tools to do things faster, et cetera, et cetera. So I think innovation is actually a responsibility of everybody within the business, depending on how you define it. But I think it's a responsibility of everybody in the business. But it always comes down to, what is the problem we're trying to solve for our clients? How do we make their lives easier? And that's just across a whole number of different vectors. So I don't subscribe to this notion of, well, we have an innovation group. We may have a group that's looking at R&D and thinking about how we push stuff forward. But I think innovation within a corporate environment, whether it's an established organization or somebody, a new business starting up, innovation takes a lot of different formats. And I think it's a responsibility of everybody in the company anchored on how do we better serve our customers. And doing that. And then there's tons of different ways, the finance operations can optimize, and customer support can optimize, and market, all these functions can do what they need to do. And they're all micro. And when you put it all together, you can actually have some pretty big, seismic changes when you look at, what you are able to impact. But I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to, how do we make lives better for our customers? And if we can figure that out and use these tools in order to do that, I think you've got a winning formula.
And then Craig, for you, I mean, especially, I keep thinking about this, like there's a whole bunch of people sitting on mountains of data, and then you guys are in a lot of ways helping them access the information or utilize the information. But I suspect there's a whole bunch of people out there in companies going, hey, I have an idea. I have an idea. Like, so like, have you seen successful approaches on how to get an idea out into the world and then access and leverage that idea with your help?
Yeah, we have. So we do. So we have this associate work that we do in Calgary, where we have young business folks or young tech folks kind of join in with companies, large companies like Suncor and TC Energy and others. I'm going to forget the other few, so I apologize, but we can run hackathons within that, and so we get combinations of internal folks from our partners as well as the associates, and the associates think very differently. They're in their early 20s in many cases. They grew up with this stuff, and their paradigm is shifted fast. I go back to this idea of you can't think with the same paradigm to solve tomorrow's problems, and so many of the business leaders have grown up in a different world and a different time and really struggle to see where those opportunities are. It's not that they don't, they know that things will change. They just don't have the skills or the exposure in many cases to know how and what those next steps are. And by running hackathons or programs or things like that with younger folks in a mix of leadership, sort of giving them some context, and then the younger folks bringing their creativity and their paradigm to those, can create these opportunities. What I've seen time and time again on the entrepreneurship side is that companies will have these and then have no outlet to actually do something with them. And that's worse. So we had a hackathon. We did something great. The winning team gets lunch. Awesome.
Right.
But I want to build a business out of this. Okay, yeah, but you can do it on the side of your desk. You get no money, no support, and you're just going to work an extra day a week essentially to build that. Well, that's also not motivation for that young employee to say, I just had this great idea, got lots of support. How does the enterprise organization, or any organization, doesn't matter to be big, but actually fund the next step? And I think it doesn't have to be expensive. You can partner. There's lots of partners that that we've seen and we can help. But how do you take it to the next step and give that entrepreneur or intrapreneur the ability and freedom to go do something with all of that learning that they just had and all of that excitement that they just kind of went through on that thing? Like we believe that our venture studio will be successful when our corporate clients come to us with ideas to say, hey, could you help us build this? Because we see this as a great opportunity, and we co-create, share the IP, create a royalty, whatever that is, instead of them just coming from outside, that we could create with our enterprise customers in this corporate lab environment. I see that it will come, but it's still a little bit of time. But I will implore the leaders of these organizations, if you're doing some of these activities, to not just stop at the end of that event that you did, the creation of them. Bring it the next step, fund it in some way, and give them space within that time to go explore it. And
it sounds a little bit like a Shark Tank kind of Dragon's Den type of idea in a way. Like, not with the lunch, but if going past that would be then apply that to the Shark Tank model, where you've got resources and investors that are interested
time
in
box and say, okay, for 3 months you've got an ability to go and try to build this. I'm going to give you 20% of your time. Take the old Google 20% sort of model, right? And we'll throw in some resources, and the company will throw in some resources, and then you're going to dedicate some of your own time to this, and let's see what happens in 3 months. And then there's a program. We got a program. We know how to do this. There's a formula to this. Not everyone's successful, but there's a formula. So they apply the formula, apply the recipe, and see what happens. And I think that is such a huge opportunity for large organizations, particularly, to inspire and get young people to think more creatively, as well as to take advantage of the mountains of data that they're sitting on to create value, as Darby absolutely correctly said, to create value for the customer, right? That they would not normally realize, because it might be a little different in the way that they operate. It might be a different value, but the customer will be so excited because you're using the existing company and everything else to build just with a new way of thinking, using existing data and structures.
And I think what you said, Greg, about the paradigm shift, that is so important. I think, in big corporate environments, like we do this a lot at Unbounce, run hackathons, and how do we just get these products out? Because this is, exciting for, young engineers to, see their product in the hands. And as business leaders, we got to measure that, hey, we have a lab section, we're testing stuff. It may not be perfect, what have you. I think my advice for older individuals that have been in this business for a bit, and I'm just, getting into unfortunately the 50s now, is, how do you almost in some ways unlearn what you've learned over the last 20 years? Because what worked, and I can look at this in micro, what worked in the 90s with my business would not work today in 2023. What worked in the 2000s wouldn't work today. And so, it's how do you unlearn some of those behaviors that worked well in the past, change that behavior, and then create a framework to allow, these, young, incredibly talented individuals, give them the space to really, spread their wings. And then when you marry those two together, I think the relationship between veterans and, new individuals coming into this career and bringing that together with a common customer problem can really unlock some magic. But I think, older people have to try to unlearn and give space to younger individuals to say, hey, I want to try to break some of these things, because they do think differently. Their environments and everything is different. And we have to embrace that. It's not a bad thing. I think it's actually a great thing, because they can teach us a lot. And if you marry those two together, you can create magic.
But there's also lots of lessons
point.
that the leadership can provide back to those young people. The world, like, that is so important as well.
Totally.
Like, there's tons of lessons there that we need to bring back to create the context.
That's true.
What's the customer value. So this is where that magic, as Darby says, gets created.
Yeah. V, it kind of reminds me of Darby and Craig. You guys might not have heard this, but we had Jennifer Reel on, who's author of a book called Creating Great Choices. She co-authored with Roger Martin and as a head of strategy at IDEO. But one of her models in that book was creating a pro chart. And for me, that was like a huge just aha moment. I'm like, oh yeah, like a lot of times you get in these scenarios where like, I hate that idea because of all these cons. And instead, one of her recommendations is learn to fall in love with an idea. Then you take the best elements of that one idea, take the good elements or the best elements of another idea, and you can combine them to make something brand new. And I think that kind of idea is so practical, especially when you have different levels of people in an organization, like executive senior people and then new junior people. And so there's a whole bunch of different ideas there. And so rather than fighting and arguing which ones are right and wrong, you could learn to appreciate and love the other's idea first before figuring out what the next step would be. So I just thought that was kind of appropriate for this. Craig and Darby, this has been awesome. Really appreciate your time. How can people find out more about each one of you?
From my standpoint, AltaML.com, so Edmonton-based AI companies, really, really exciting. And then personally on LinkedIn is an easy way to catch me at Craig Hainey.
Yeah, and on my end, obviously Unbounce.com, that's our corporate URL. Like Greg, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so do a search for Darby Sieben. You'll find me a lot. And for anybody else that might want to go the traditional web route, they can just go to darby.ca and they can see all, my historical 20 years of publishing blog posts going back 20 some odd years, which some of it's really dated now. But LinkedIn, if you want to personally get a hold of me, that is absolutely the best place to do it.
Awesome. V, you're muted. Yeah, I can't hear you. Weird. No. Okay. Well, I'll just say thanks so much, guys. It was great to have you on the show, and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot, Mark and V. It's been super fun, and Darby, it was great to have a co-pilot here with us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, V and Greg. I just love everything that AltaML is doing, and love those Alberta-based companies that are going to change the landscape for Canada going forward. I have no doubt about it. So you guys keep doing what you're doing. I love every minute of it.
Great.
And here's the Post Pod with V and Marc.
Post Pod.
Hey-o.
There it is. After an episode off, we're back with a vengeance.
With the real Post Pod. Well, I mean, we were the Post Pod.
Yeah.
The last
we're
time.
the Post Pod.
Yeah. That was fun talking with them.
Man, it's one of those things that we read about it every day. We're likely consumed around, the excitement and the hype around ChatGPT. But I think quickly you realize, or at least I realized through our conversation with both Darby and Craig, is this is just one part of this whole AI, ML journey that we're on. And I think it's interesting to see even some of the additional applications that they talked about in their respective organizations. But more importantly, how it's not, we're not going away. We're not dying. We're still going to be here. Let's calm down, learn to embrace it, use it.
Rise of the Machines, the Terminator, Arnold is not going to take.
Arnie's not coming back, gentlemen, or everyone. Sorry.
Yeah.
He's not coming back.
Yeah. It's funny. We were just chatting with this off air with them. But we always do this where like we get off air and then we stop recording and then we have these great conversations. And Darby brought up a great point during that period, which was that the business models are also going to change. Like, as an example, Google search. So you mentioned during your, you mentioned your love of ChatGPT and Microsoft Edge and how you've converted, but that is changing. You're changing. Like that was an example of you changing behavior. Darby's doing the same, but bit by bit, that changes the business model as well. Because for so long, Google search was the premier dominant, 90-ish% of all searches being done on Google, which still might be true, but the time spent on Google is probably shrinking bit by bit as ChatGPT and other channels like that pick up a lot of steam, right? So you're searching differently now. And I know Google's got Bard and they're going to kind of work through that, but the underlying business model will be affected.
100%.
And so I think there's an opportunity while the platforms are changing, this is Darby's point, while the platforms are changing, to also innovate on the business models and think about how you can create new value for existing companies with existing products and services, but also with new tools and how you can, create services and revenue streams through new tools.
I think it just goes to show you that there's probably nothing or an industry or an organization that cannot be dethroned, so to speak, or disrupted once again. Everyone was quick to write off the Microsofts of the world, if you will, because there's a lot of Microsoft examples across the industries. But here we are today with Microsoft's investment in OpenAI and whatnot, and they're kind of like the first ones that are really kind of bringing it to users in a unique way through their integration on their web browser. So, and and I'll be honest, it's not like I'm a Microsoft fanboy. I just like how they've already taken that step, and I'm trying to understand and use it and see how that is changing the way I search things and whatnot.
Sure.
But I think what I really enjoyed about this conversation, because I know you and I are kind of both on the whole voice thing. Look at that, ha ha ha! It hasn't really happened.
That's a good point.
However. Now with
it hasn't happened.
But now is it going to happen? And I'm just waiting for all the futurists to kind of reach out to us and be like, told you so.
Maybe it might have just been too premature for like the
timing,
capacity and totally, and like the technology, like Craig had talked about NVIDIA and just the chips and like the technical, like the computing capacity wasn't there.
No. And I think that's what's exciting about this is like, we're going to see, and I think each of you kind of touched on, how your kids are interacting with your, in-home devices, where voice is becoming more natural. Voice is natural. And the idea of the traditional keyboard and mouse is going to go away. And that's when we'll probably reach that I don't know what the right word is here, but anyways, that point where it becomes now a natural extension of who we are. And it's funny to think about that. That may not be too far along. That may be in 10, 15, 20 years. So there's a good chance that we will experience this and see that, we'll be doing this podcast without a mouse, without a keyboard. We'll have platforms set up and we're just going to be talking, bringing in guests and whatnot with gestures and not using these peripheral devices. So I think it's an exciting time, and we should just
totally
be open to it.
Well, yeah, and we talked a lot about ChatGPT, but you and I also were, and we also talked about how many different applications there are for this. You and I were working on this paper separately, but same course. And I think I sent you that link, Go Zigzag. Yeah. And it's they call it an AI entrepreneur in residence, but I literally put in the product idea and the target market, and it spit out a whole startup business plan, including the business model canvas, and like your target market and segments and blah, blah, in like 30 seconds. So it may not be accurate and right, but holy, does it do an amazing job at like bringing an idea to light and illuminating the idea so quickly that you could iterate on that so many ways and times and then refine it on your own. And so it reduces the need for, complicated research and all that kind of stuff.
Like think about the business case that we're bringing to life in school right now. Without some of these AI tools or assistants, if you want, I kind of use Zigzag or, ChatGPT as kind of an assistant. I'll throw something in there. I'm like, is there merit to this? There isn't. Okay, going in another direction. Yeah. But you quickly you can build a foundation very quickly. And now, based on your expertise, you can fine tune that, make it better and whatnot. And this is where I think where a lot of the doomsayers are missing the point. You still need to be a trained coder. So, there's videos of people building websites with ChatGPT. If you watch those videos and see the questions the coders are actually asking ChatGPT to change, to alter, you have to be I can't do that. So the same thing, ChatGPT is not going to become a marketer, going to replace marketers. What it's going to do, though, it's going to help us accelerate our ability to maybe find that target audience, maybe narrow down a persona, or whatever the case may be. But we know because we're going to be asking it the questions that apply to our discipline. It's not just someone that has no idea about marketing all of a sudden overnight becomes a marketer. So that's I think is the power, and that's why we have to stay curious and we have to use these tools, because I think we become better for them. Just recently, I think my last couple interviews, man, they are asking blatantly, "What is your take on generative AI? How do you see it applying in marketing?" So it's a part of our vernacular now. We have to become comfortable with this.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't had that in any interviews yet, but I know that I'm expecting it to come. Yeah, totally. And actually, it'd be interesting. I should be asking that actually in future interviews. Just what is your take on that? Because I do think, going back to Craig's point, like there's this is a cool opportunity, and so in some ways, I think it's an interesting cultural lens to sort of understand a company's perspective on how do they deal with things like this, because there's a huge opportunity, I think, for a lot of companies to leverage this kind of information and take it beyond just, we did this hackathon and everyone in the winter got lunch.
That was a great example.
Yeah, I mean,
it's true. How many organizations just stay there?
Yeah, totally. And how many organizations, this is the part that makes me crazy, because I know this is true. So many organizations are sitting on mountains of data, and the idea of like big data is really a big pain in the ass in my mind, because data does not mean intelligence.
No.
And so you can have all kinds of data, but it doesn't mean you're becoming more intelligent with like how you're pulling insights out of it, and how you're changing the value proposition, or how you're positioning the company, or how the products you're creating, and that kind of stuff. So I think there's so much opportunity there.
One application that I was, as Craig was talking, actually, and Darby as well, but one thing that really popped to mind was, you want your consumers, if I think in a retail setting, even in airline, we had this, you want to make sure you give consumers the tools to be able to self-serve as much of their journey. Maybe this applies to airlines even more, but you want to be able for them to change their seats, rebook, cancel, etc. And I think that because COVID created such a high demand and put a lot of pressure on, say the contact center, the way you model your data and the way you bring in a lot of this information, if you can accelerate the ability to self-serve or give consumers the ability to self-serve their own transactions, I really believe like that's going to accelerate and make more loyal, build loyalty potentially around a product or a service. And you can do that because you're sitting on all of this. Like a contact center, all they have to do, they have to query the data. They find the data that applies, say, to a specific itinerary. But if you just make that available and have them self-serve and let the contact center really, focus on some of those really difficult circumstances and whatnot, it makes it easier for the consumer, makes it easier for the contact center, alleviates a lot of that pressure. And I think there's a lot of those applications that you'll see over time, AI really start becoming more at the forefront.
Sure. Yeah. Well, even like this isn't complicated, but it's a similar idea. Like in B2B, I think you mentioned B2B, but there's so many changes on how consumers want to buy because B2B consumers are also B2C consumers. And so the standard now is like the Amazon single click purchase kind of thing. And so people are always thinking about benchmarking. Well, how easy is it for me to do it there? And why can't I do that here? But in terms of the contact center, the other one that comes up all the time is like, hey, give me your name and number. And then you get passed over to the next person. Hey, give me your name and number. I'm like, come on. Like there's so much, even in something as unsophisticated as just creating a better customer experience from just, passing one person from another to another to another. Like there's got to be huge opportunities there.
I agree. Let me ask you this. Because I got really excited after our conversation with both Craig and Darby. But what excites you most about what's coming in this space?
I think, truthfully, like I've always been a huge fan of kind of like, again, I think we were talking about this with Darby offline, and Craig offline. But I've always been really interested in helping organizations transform, whatever that might have been. Like back when I was in pharma, like I got a phone for the first time and we got laptop. I was working when I didn't have a laptop and then I got a laptop. And so how do we use this technology to improve the way that we operate? And then when I went into broadcast media, it was like cold calling was the only way. And then I built an inbound lead gen funnel and that was like, oh, so that worked. And then, at FGO, when you and I worked together, it was like people were reading print flyers all the time. And now they're not as much anymore. How do we transform that into something different, like a digital flyer or social flyer? And so everywhere I've gone is kind of like that same idea. B2B was the same thing. There's the, consumers used to have to go exclusively through a salesperson to get all the information they wanted. And we're creating these downloadable gated content things. And maybe we don't have to because they don't. So there's all kinds of scenarios where I think that's interesting. What gets me excited about this next phase is that it's the ground floor, I feel like.
Yes.
And I do feel like there's so many opportunities for improvement and enhancement within an existing company. Like every company's constantly, you can think about it, training to better serve their customers. And so for companies that want to continue to train to be able to better serve their customers, I get excited thinking about what could be done with all the existing assets that they have and thinking about new ways to create value.
So for me, it's exactly what you just said there. It's we're at the point right now where it's 100% the ground floor. You can help many organizations kind of rethink how they do things and really become more consumer centric, because I think what we'll see over the next few years is an acceleration and an adoption of this technology by consumers that are now going to force organizations to rethink how they engage with their brand or their service or whatever. And I think I'm really excited to see what that transition is going to look like over the next little bit, because I think this one's going to happen quick. This is not the metaverse. This is going to be something that sticks. Obviously, there's endless applications for this, and I love that Craig and Darby really kind of highlighted that this is not a platform. This is a tool, and every technology vendor, every business is going to look to adopt it differently. And that's, for me, like, incredibly exciting to see the creativity that's going to come out of this space, because this new tool that we have now in our pockets, either as marketers or running businesses or, strategy, all of it.
Customer service, like every vertical within an organization, farming, manufacturing, supply chain, like all of
everything. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah, it's really good. There's an example. Craig brought up that one example about, I don't remember if you mentioned the company name, but they have all like 80,000 articles or something for customer service. And it reminded me of this case study I read a while back from Xerox. Had a thing where it was called Xerox Eureka. And so if I remember correctly, what it was is they had a manual that they sent their service technicians into the field. And they're like, okay, here's this manual for all the problems that you might come across. And here's the fix. How do you, as a technician, here's how you fix it. What they realized pretty quickly is that the service technicians are like, well, I have this problem or this error code or whatever the thing was, and there's no corresponding solution or fix in the manual it gave me. So then what they started doing with the internet, they're like, well, let's build a database of solutions that are coming, or fix problems, and then their solutions that are coming up in the field from the service technicians. And then everybody can access that. So to me, that's a really cool particular use case, and what, similar to what Craig was thinking. Like the challenge, and my last organization that I was just in, like there's all this information there, and we talked a lot about enablement, training, like self-directed training, self-directed enablement, but you can't find it like in a SharePoint. No. Like it's so hard to find it, and somebody who's like the librarian, let's call it, knows where all the stuff is. But unless you have access to that person's time, you can't find the information. Exactly. And because the metadata has not been appropriately tagged or whatever. So I think this is where AI is such a cool example, where you could create an AI user interface that, and I think this is where Microsoft is really well positioned, because it will embed a lot of this stuff into its existing products like SharePoint or PowerPoint or Word or whatever, all of it.
Do you remember the little paperclip that Microsoft Word used to have? It's like the paperclip has grown up now, and it's in a totally different version, or it's morphed into something else. No, I'm with you, and technology always, for me, is always interesting, and I've always have this unique curiosity around it. I just love all the applications of what's coming, and I wasn't joking. Like as I'm prepping for interviews, like I will literally copy and paste a job description in
I do that all the time right now.
And it's just like, hey, spit out 10 questions that I could be asked. And it just helps frame how I prepare for the interview. And it's become my assistant. It's my assistant.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm putting in my resume too into ChatGPT and going, rewrite this like a CEO might, or position this like, write a cover letter for me based on my resume and my background and appealing to like whoever the hiring manager is and things like, and it's spitting out tons of stuff that it would have taken me hours to do.
And the reality is while you can go through that and be like, okay, that applies, this doesn't apply. You already have something to work from though. And you can really kind of then hone it in the way you want it. And we didn't have the ability to do that. So it's not taking away anything from you as a marketer just because now you have a head start. you're still who you are. You're still like an expert in your field. So I think that's where the nuance here, where it's like, just embrace this technology. There's a great opportunity here and a lot of use cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. V, that was really fun chat.
Fantastic conversation.
Yeah, it was really good. I was just looking through my notes to see if there's anything else that was going to change or to add, but I think we covered off almost all of it.
Yeah. The only other thing that kind of was like just around Craig's comment around responsible AI, I think is important to highlight that, we do have a responsibility here, that we are, using it for all the right reasons. We're not trying
for sure
to be malice in our approach or, use cases. No, it's going to be somewhat inevitable, but I think it's as long as the people that are really behind this technology, or thought leaders, or even, key stakeholders internally in organizations, we have a responsibility to make sure that we're looking at this technology through the right lens.
Totally. Well, and even if you have the best intentions, with no malice and no bad intentions whatsoever, you still like setting a KPI can have this effect. Like, you intend it to have the right behavioral outcome, but sometimes it creates a behavior you didn't expect.
Exactly.
So I think it's worthwhile just keeping a check on that and being open to the possibility that even though you might have thought through everything that you could think of, and considered and mitigated for all the risk and only and optimized for all the gain, you still might end up with something that isn't as exactly as intended, an unintended consequence that needs to get fixed. So
great point.
Yeah, I think it's a interesting area for sure, just to be open to new possibilities, even though you might have considered all the, or you thought you might have considered them all.
No, that's a great point. Another beauty, man. This was great.
Yeah, really good. Okay. I'm excited about the lineup, by the way, for the next little bit.
We have a pretty strong lineup, and our audience is going to be just over the moon, who we'll be announcing soon. But this is going to be great. Stick around,
totally.
Everyone. Why do I keep saying boys? What the hell's my problem?
Well, because I'm here.
Fair enough. Jesus.
All right. V.
Marc.
Adieu.
Boy. There it is again.